if it's a school day, if it's during school hours, 1/5 of the total American population consists of public school students K through 12. 1 in 5 Americans. And if you count teachers and administrators, you're probably going to get pretty close to 1/4 of the population of the country at any given time on a weekday is sitting in a public school building.
We all have memories of school. The games we played, the friends we met, the teachers who nurtured us, and the ones who imposed strict discipline. We learned how to spell, to read, to add and subtract. From generation to generation, for each era and individual, school has defined the shape of our young lives. In school, we became aware of something larger than ourselves and our family. We became part of one nation. But school is also the place where we have fought important battles, not only about education, but about the meaning and practice of democracy itself. Born out of centuries of conflict, innovation, and experimentation, the American system of public schools is one of the nation's most significant and still unfinished achievements.
Most people believe that the idea that all Americans should get a free education at the expense of the government through high school graduation or possibly college was kind of written into the Constitution or was in the Declaration of Independence or some kind of founding principle of the country. Well, it's not. And that was a new, radical, crazy-seeming idea.
In the 13 colonies of pre-revolutionary America, only the larger towns in New England were required by law to build schools. Elsewhere, education was neither free nor public.
If there were schools at all, and many communities had them and some didn't, there were schools because people in a particular town or village or section of a county decided they wanted to get together and sort of pool their resources and hire a teacher. And thus you have the famous old stories about the teacher who was paid with 2 bushels of wheat and a half a cow or something like that.
Little children were given a horn book, a printed copy of the alphabet, and a short prayer, mounted on wood and covered with transparent cow horn. Most schooling was closely linked to the Protestant Bible, brought by early settlers to the New World.
In the Puritan colonies, one of the concerns was whether or not the people would follow the laws of the state and the Word of God and the Scriptures. So that in the teaching, there's a certain level of fear instilled in all children that if they failed to obey authority, they were damned.
The most common school book was the New England Primer, used by instructors to teach reading, and the Protestant Catechism.
What will be your condition in hell?
I shall be dreadfully tormented.
What company will be there?
Legions of devils and multitudes of sinners of the human race.
Some older boys went to grammar school, where they studied mathematics, Latin, and philosophy. Only the most privileged had the means to continue on through college or university.
The major thrust of schooling was to preserve the status quo. 18th century schools were preparing children to take the place of their parents, to be like their parents.
By the time of the Revolutionary War, the vast majority of Americans were educated just enough to read the newspaper and the Bible. and figure their taxes. Having won their independence from Britain, Americans rallied under the leadership of General George Washington. Ahead lay the difficult task of building a nation out of 13 former colonies. Many believed that schools could play a critical role. For Noah Webster, a teacher in Connecticut, the first step was to eliminate British textbooks from American classrooms.
Noah Webster is often called the schoolmaster of America. He believed that there needed to be a national history where we could feel that we had a unified culture. And this national history had to be built upon legends of the founding fathers. For instance, you needed to teach things about Washington cutting down the cherry tree so that you could create these national ideals.
In 1783, Webster published a textbook known as the Blueback Speller. Webster's speller promoted a new national language to be spelled and pronounced differently from British English. The speller became America's textbook. It sold millions of copies over the years and was a forerunner to Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language.
Preach a crusade against ignorance. Establish and improve the law for educating the common people. General education will enable every man to judge for himself what will secure or endanger his freedom.
To leaders like Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, the survival of the democracy depended on educating all Americans.
Jefferson said that in a democracy, the people vote and choose their rulers. And that means you have to learn to read and write, and you have to learn enough of the foundations of education to be a citizen.
In 1778, as a member of the Virginia Assembly, he drafted a proposal to guarantee 3 years of public schooling for all children, with advanced education for a select few.
Jefferson's idea was a little bit of universal education with two purposes. One, to give people the democratic basics, and two, to be a kind of staging area or an audition site for this small group of natural aristocrats who would then be given a full-dress university education and then serve the country as he had done.
As Jefferson put it, raking a few geniuses from the rubbish and giving them scholarships to go on to secondary school and then to the university, of having a meritocracy in which the most able people could be educated at public expense up to a high level.
Jefferson didn't consider the possibility of female geniuses. His plan allowed 3 years of schooling for girls, enough to prepare them for marriage and motherhood. And he offered no education to slaves. For slaves, education was often a hidden and dangerous undertaking.
There was a sewing school where the children came to school ostensibly to learn sewing, and they would sit and they would sew. But of course, underneath that material would be the textbooks. And so even during slavery, at risk of life, people were interested in trying to attain this magical something that we call literacy.